Alright, hello everyone! Today we're going to be talking about the presidencies of George H.W. Bush and William Jefferson Clinton. You're going to need page number 127 out in front of you. We're going to continue that summarizing style of note-taking that we've been working on in class. My apologies that we didn't get to do this in class and that it ended up being homework. We're going to try to keep this one as short as possible. So get out page 127 and let's get going.
My opponent won't rule out raising taxes, but I will, and the Congress will push me to raise taxes, and I'll say no, and they'll push, and I'll say no, and they'll push again, and I'll say to them, read my lips. No new taxes.
What you just heard was candidate George H.W. Bush pledging that there will be no new taxes under a President George H.W. Bush. It is promises like this and the promise to continue the Reagan Revolution that will land him a pretty easy victory in the election of 1988 over Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis. The same Reagan Revolution that helps George H.W. Bush become president will also cause problems for him, because what that had done was created a rather large national budget deficit, and the House and the Senate were pushing Bush to raise taxes to help curb this deficit. Remember, Reagan had decreased taxes, decreased spending in social programs and education, yet at the same time increased spending with defense and national security. So George H.W. Bush, instead of saying, read my lips, no new taxes, agrees in 1990 to raise taxes as a part of a budget agreement. This will not help George H.W. Bush when running for re-election in 1992. A national debt wasn't the only thing that President Bush was inheriting from Reagan. He also faced a crisis involving savings and loan associations. What these are financial institutions that were set up to provide home loans to the public, usually low-income home loans. But during the Reagan years, there had been a series of deregulations going on in the S&L industry. What happened was S&L associations started making risky loans in the hopes of earning higher profits. And what will happen is more than 1,000 of these S&Ls will stumble into financial troubles, and some of them will go bankrupt. A slowdown in lending and home sales resulted in a hurting economy. This should sound very, very similar to what happened in the 2000s. By 1990, the nation was moving into a recession, and unemployment was on the rise, right? We see slumping home sales along with higher taxes. The economy, unemployment is rising. Doesn't sound good for President Bush. But now let's focus on some of the accomplishments of President Bush's term. The first being the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. This is a law that banned discrimination in employment against people with disabilities. It also required employers to make reasonable accommodation to help disabled employees. This might mean building a ramp to enable a person in a wheelchair to enter a workplace, or it could entail ordering special equipment to help workers with limited vision or hearing carry out their job responsibilities. Another law that was a big gain for President Bush was the Clean Air Act of 1990, which called for further reductions of emissions that cause air pollution and acid rain. Shifting to the foreign policy of President George H.W. Bush, there are some major things that occur during his presidency. The first is the ending of the Cold War. The Berlin Wall comes down in 1989. East and West Germany were reunited. The USSR will collapse in 1991, and Bush is able to get Russia to agree to the reduction of nuclear stockpiles with the STAR II treaty. We often, though, associate the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union with the Reagan years, because it is associated with the pressures that were put on by Reagan that led to the ending of the Cold War. This is not usually linked with George H.W. Bush as a victory for him. So now let's shift to some foreign policy decisions directly linked to George H.W. Bush. The first involves Panama, where they had a ruler, Manuel Noriega, who had been previously really friendly with the United States as he had helped them back the Contras in the overthrow of the Nicaraguan government during the 1980s. However, things turned sour with Noriega once he starts banning elections in Panama. Once the Panamanians start to revolt against him, the U.S. realizes, we shouldn't support this guy. They also start to freak out that he might withdraw support for for us and other world powers using the Panama Canal. So, with some evidence of him being involved in drug trafficking, we decide to intervene in December of 1989 and quickly overthrow him from power and capture Noriega and bring him to Miami, where he's tried and then imprisoned on drug trafficking. Some around the world will question the U.S.'s actions, wondering, is it right for them to be intervening in other countries like this? Despite critics, this will not be the only time that the United States intervenes in a foreign country under President George H.W. Bush. The next episode will involve the country of Iraq, where in August of 1990, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein decides to invade their southern neighbor in Kuwait, a small oil-rich country in the Persian Gulf. This sets off alarm bells for countries like the United States because Saddam Hussein controls a rather large military in a region prone to instability. Second, the United States and other developed nations relied on oil from the Persian Gulf, and Saddam's actions threatened the oil supply and could wreak havoc on Western economies. Third, if Saddam's invasion of Kuwait succeeded, he might decide to invade other countries in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia, a U.S. ally and major oil producer. So President Bush condemns the attacks and quickly calls for the UN to form a coalition to force Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. After issuing economic sanctions and an ultimatum to Saddam Hussein, they realize that action is necessary. And on January 12th, the U.S. Congress approves the use of all necessary means to free Kuwait from Iraqi occupation. 2 months later, the war will be over, the Persian Gulf War, as Saddam Hussein and his forces will be pushed out of Kuwait. However, the war had lasting effects on the Persian Gulf region, because as Saddam's troops left Kuwait, they set fire to the country's oil fields. These fires burned out of control, causing an environmental disaster in much of the area. The war also had a severe impact on Iraq. It destroyed key infrastructure and left as many as 100,000 people dead. In contrast, fewer than 300 coalition soldiers had died in the battle. So it's a success for countries in the coalition involving the United States, not a success for countries in the Persian Gulf, such as Iraq and Kuwait. However, as a result of this war, President George H.W. Bush's approval rating will be extremely high at 88% following this quick 2-month war in the Persian Gulf. This brings us up to the presidential election of 1992. There are a few things in play here. Remember, President Bush is coming off of a major foreign policy victory in the Persian Gulf War. But, at the same time, the economy is tanking at home. There's new taxes, despite the promise that there wouldn't be. There's high unemployment, despite the pledge for 30 million new jobs within 8 years. And their housing market is slumping due to the S&L crisis. So America's forced to make a decision. Which matters most? The foreign policy victories or the slumping economy? And another wrinkle in the system is it's not just going to be an election between two candidates. There's also going to be a third-party candidate in Ross Perot. Ross Perot will earn 19 million votes in the general election, despite winning 0 electoral votes. What this does, though, is it will take away votes from President George H.W. Bush and lead to an easy victory for Arkansas Governor William Jefferson Clinton. What this does is it shows the impact that a third party can have on presidential politics, right? If we remember back to the election of 1860, we saw a similar thing happen with President Lincoln becoming easily elected because the votes are split on the pro-slavery side of the ballot. We'll also see a similar thing happen in the election of 2000 when Ralph Nader takes away votes from Al Gore. So, new president, William Jefferson Clinton, shows that the American public is concerned more about the economy than the foreign policy victories. One of the first major things that President Clinton does is sending a health care plan to the Congress. This is a plan that calls for universal health care, or health care for all Americans. It was created by a panel that was headed by First Lady Hillary Clinton. But the plan proved too complex for most people to comprehend, and healthcare providers opposed it, fearing increased government regulation. After much debate, Congress chose not to act on the plan. When Clinton left office in 2000, about 40 million Americans still lacked health insurance. Hopefully you've already made the connection to, wait, didn't we just pass a healthcare law that's gained the nickname Obamacare? Because guess what? We did. And we're going to talk about comparisons to the Obamacare law and the proposed Clinton plan of the 1990s next class. Another issue that will come up under Clinton involves Social Security, because the baby boomers are getting very, very close to retirement age, and this will represent a giant strain on the Social Security system. This is still an issue today. Welfare will be reformed under President Clinton, as limits will be placed on the amount of time a family can receive welfare. And President Clinton will sign a policy known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which allows homosexuals to serve in the military as long as they kept their sexual preference a secret. This has just been overturned and has, by President Obama, now allowing homosexuals to openly serve in the military. Some of the major victories for President Clinton involves the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1993, more commonly known as the Brady Bill, which required a waiting period and background check before the purchase of a handgun, and also the Family and Medical Leave Act, which allows workers to take time off for family emergencies. This includes things like military service, family military leave, pregnancy, adoption, or the foster care placement of a child, and personal or family illness. But Clinton will also face the problem of the midterm elections, where both the House of Representatives and the Senate will become a Republican-controlled Congress. But Clinton is able to work with the House and the Senate controlled by the Republicans in balancing the budget in 1997, and they will also face economic prosperity aided by a booming technology market. Now shifting to foreign policy, President Clinton was able to get the two sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to come together several times in an effort to negotiate peace. However, no official peace was ever signed. This was a good sign that they were willing to talk to each other, with the last of these discussions coming in the year 2000 at the Camp David summit. The U.S. would also face problems in foreign countries such as the former Yugoslavia, which included Bosnia, Serbia, and Kosovo. We will see a genocide occurring, and the U.S. will back a NATO military action against this ethnic cleansing. However, the U.S. and NATO will fail to stop a genocide occurring in Rwanda in Africa. NATO will expand during the Clinton years as they welcome new members of the former Warsaw Pact, including the Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary. There will be lots of decisions made under a new global economy, right? Globalization's occurring. The North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement will be signed, which breaks down trade barriers between Mexico, Canada, and the United States, including the removal of tariffs. The World Trade Organization will be organized, which will work to regulate trade across the world, and the European Union is formed. Now shifting back to domestic policy, we have to talk about a couple scandals involving Clinton. The first is known as Whitewater, which is where President Clinton is charged with illegally profiting from a real estate development in Arkansas. Attorney General Janet Reno will appoint lawyer Kenneth Starr to investigate the Whitewater claims. But in January of 1998, Starr also obtains evidence that Clinton had engaged in an affair with a White House intern, Monica Lewinsky. This directly contradicted Clinton's earlier testimony involving Paula Jones, someone who had accused him of sexual harassment while he was governor of Arkansas. In September of 1998, Starr submitted to Congress a report that accused the president of committing perjury or lying under oath. It also recommended that Clinton be impeached. And in December, the House voted along party lines to impeach President Clinton on 2 counts. He had committed perjury and that he had obstructed justice by lying under oath. In January of 1999, the Senate tried Clinton on both accounts. At the close of the trial, senators voted along party lines. As a result, the votes on both charges fell far short of the 2/3 needed to remove Clinton from office. Yet, we still remember Clinton as being a successful president because of the booming economy under his presidency. My apologies that this video went longer than expected. We'll see you next time in class.